This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Herzog Foundation.
Time for school.
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, and I'm joined by a friend out of Annapolis, Maryland, Soren Schwab, who's the VP of Partnerships at Classic Learning Test, or AKA CLT, if you've heard about them. They're an awesome company that is serving schools all over the United States and probably even abroad. We'll probably dive into that here in just a little bit. But Soren's an awesome guy. I've gotten to know him at some of the different conferences that I've been going to get school connections and learn from the school community. And I was like, man, we got to have CLT on the podcast to dive into just testing in general and all of that. So that's what we're going to do today. But before we do that, I always like to pass it off to our guests to introduce themselves. So Soren, welcome to the podcast today.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. I'm a regular listener. I just listened to the 𝑦𝑜𝑢'𝑟𝑒 episode. It was just amazing and always edifying. So an honor to be on, Mitchell. I appreciate it. Yeah. So CLT, I actually grew up in Germany. I'm a German citizen still. We talked about elections. I'm not allowed to vote just yet until I become a naturalized citizen. But yeah, went to public school my whole life in Germany. And then through, I would say God's providence, ended up doing an exchange here at a small Christian liberal arts school in Michigan called Hillsdale College. A lot of the listeners have probably heard of Hillsdale. Pretty big brand power and recognition. A small school, 1,200 students. Just completely transformed just my life, my faith, and ended up staying instead of 1 year, 3 years. Got a degree, and that was in 2012. And I have not. Of course, I'm visiting Germany, but I have not moved back. And so it's been almost 15 years of living in this wonderful country, and now honored to be in the kind of the school renewal. Some call it, classical renewal, liberal arts renewal, Christian school renewal. We can talk about all that, but just an honor to be part of it. And in a way, Mitchell, I feel like we oftentimes exchange, just thoughts and ideas, and we kind of touch a lot of different groups of folks and of schools, and sometimes have kind of the outsider's perspective, which is neat.
It is. And it's going to be a fun episode today as we dive into all of that. And so obviously, thank you for taking time and hopping on. I love your background and your story. I love that you came over from Germany to be in the US and now helping us hopefully make our education system better and the students better that are coming out of it. Before we dive into all the nitty gritty, I always start with the same question that I don't know if I gave you a heads up on. I usually don't, because it's more fun when I don't do that. But we're going to actually make it two parts here. So I always ask this question. If I was to visit you in Annapolis, Maryland, which I've actually never been to, I've been to Maryland once, but I've never been to Annapolis. What would you say, Mitchell, you need to eat this and do this? And so I'm going to partner with that, but as well as I want you to share about Germany, because I've also never been to Germany. So if you were to say, Mitchell, if you visit my hometown or even just Germany in general, what also do I need to eat in Germany and then do for fun?
Oh my goodness. So Annapolis, Maryland, it's right down the street from the Naval Academy, right on the Chesapeake Bay. It's beautiful. You should all visit. Historic town. We're just a few houses down from where the Treaty of Paris was signed. We're known for our crab cake. So when you come to Annapolis, you got to get a crab cake. I mean, they do everything crab dip, crab cake, crab everything. But you get a good crab cake at Ruth's Deli. It has been on all the diners, dives, and drive-ins, or whatever the shows are called. But it's really, really good. So you got to get a crab cake, and then I would say walk the Naval Academy campus. It is so accessible. It's right downtown. I used to live in Colorado Springs, and the Air Force Academy is kind of far out and not as accessible. In Annapolis, you walk downtown, you see the midshipmen in their white uniforms, looking all dapper, and it's just a beautiful campus, beautiful chapel right on the Chesapeake Bay. Germany, oh my goodness, my hometown is called Zweibrücken. Which means two bridges. Zweibrücken. We have more than two bridges by now, but when it was founded, it only had two, and it's in the Rhineland, and so think like beautiful rivers, hills, and castles. I know that sounds so stereotypical, but that's kind of what it's like. Oh, vineyards. I forgot the vineyards. So I would say you would have to come and do a little boat cruise, kind of, along the river, see the vineyards, and then visit a castle, of which there are plenty. And that's kind of what my region is known for. So we don't have lederhosen. So don't do that when you come to my hometown. You get laughed at. And we're have a good glass of white wine. And food wise, there's so much. I would probably say have a bratwurst, because what you're getting here, what they sell as bratwurst, is just not the same.
Man, and I like the ones here. So
really? You're gonna be blown away.
Oh boy! Yeah, and you guys load them up in Germany with a whole bunch of toppings.
No, usually not. I mean, I'm a purist. I just put some mustard on it. But yes, there are some people. But I remember when I had my first bratwurst here, and I didn't even see the sausage. Like, there was so much stuff on top. Like, are you hiding the quality of the sausage? So I'm kind of a purist when it comes to that. The less, the more.
Okay, well, now I know what I got to do when I go to Germany. So it's on the ever-growing list of places I'd love to visit one day. So I'll probably need you to help me translate. So I might have to just keep your cell phone handy, be like, help me out here. So, all right. Well, as we dive in, I know we've had guests on before that are either classical head of schools or at a classical school, and so I would love to I know that's kind of the background of, I think, where all this kind of came from. So love to just kind of, for those that are listening, maybe they don't know what classical, or when you say classic learning test, like what is this classical? Maybe dive into that first before we dive into actual testing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's we're the classic learning test, but I think a lot of folks call us the classical learning test, almost using it interchangeably. And I understand why, because I think early on, kind of the first adopters happen to be more of your classical homeschool families, classical Christian schools. We mean classic as in traditional, kind of thinking about, Matthew Arnold's The Best of What's Been Thought and Said, just a traditional classics-based education. When it comes to classical, and I've got to be honest, I am not going to be the expert here on what classical is. There are people with way more degrees and have spent a lot of time thinking about this. And so I would refer you to folks like Dr. Chris Perrin at Classical Academic Press, Martin Cawthron at Memoria Press. They have definitions and videos about what do they mean when they say classical. I love the 𝐶𝑟𝑒 Institute and kind of how they define classical education. So I'll share that with you, and then I maybe can expound a little bit. But they refer to as the cultivation of wisdom and virtue by nourishing the soul on truth, goodness, and beauty by means of the 7 liberal arts and 4 sciences. Right. And so you kind of have what is this about, this education? Well, it's about the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. So so classical education is deeply concerned with the telos. Like, why do we do all this? What's the end of education? It's human flourishing, right? And so nourishing the soul, right? It's about formation. It's not just about information. A lot of progressive schools, government schools, are about skills, about information, right? Classical education is concerned with the formation of the human soul. And then how you do that? Well, several liberal arts and the sciences, right? And so it's a liberal arts education, traditional education. Cornel West has another definition that I love. It's an education as a deep dive into what it means to be human. And I really, really enjoy that. When I grew up in Germany, going to school there, those words, even in translation, like, they never came up. We never talked about wisdom, virtue, truth, goodness, beauty. It was all about skills and how to be employable. And I think, one can probably extrapolate that to now what is happening in most public schools in the United States, right? Yeah. And so not as much focus on character formation. And so when you visit a classical school, you're probably going to see some things that are maybe a little different from your traditional private school. There's definitely a focus on kind of the Western canon, Western civilization, the great books, primary source material. You'll probably find students studying Latin. You'll see a lot of Socratic seminars. And so now some of your listeners might be at a Christian school and say, wait a minute, we do almost all of that, but we're not a classical school. And I would actually say I've visited Christian schools that say they're not classical, and I visit them and I'm like, you seem pretty classical to me, right? And maybe there are some, things that they would disagree on, but for me personally, and I know that I'm not representing the movement, Um, but if you're a traditional liberal arts classical school, you're a non-progressive school, right? And you have so much more in common. If you're an ACSI Christian school, you have more in common with a classical Christian school than you do with a public school down the street, right? And there might be some terminology differences. A lot of, Mitchell, you visited them, right? A lot of classical schools, they don't have an elementary school, the grammar school, right? And they have the school of logic and the school of rhetoric. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of overlap with kind of your traditional Christian schools.
So we then take all this classical world, and then we dive into the world of testing. And so I know you guys are obviously, like you said, classic learning test, and then but you also got the SAT and the ACT, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of others. I remember taking the SAT when I was way back in the day when I was in high school, and I was homeschooled my whole life, so I didn't have I feel like I remember going through it and being definitely overwhelmed. And I remember going through things on the SAT that I was like, oh my goodness, I learned this 4 years ago. I don't remember it enough to test on it. And I know I did not do great on the SAT. And so I don't know much about the world of testing, to be honest with you, in terms of why do we do it? And then where does it come from? Who created it? Why are we judged on it? So I kind of would love to just dive into the world of testing, at least in the US side, of what you've seen, because you guys have your own version of you get SAT, ACT, CLT. So let's dive into testing. Where did that come from? As maybe to begin with, if we can dive into that.
Yeah, that's a lot of unpack,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, testing has always happened, right? Like the standardized testing, however, is a fairly, it's a modern concept, and it actually goes back to the early 1900s, and kind of the precursor to the SAT was the Army mental test, which was actually an aptitude test. Because the World War I breaking out, the military needed to know, which soldiers are we sending on the front line, and which soldiers are going to be in intelligence. And so, speak about a high stakes test, right? When you're, that your life might depend on that. And so, a lot of these kind of were more aptitude tests, as in not just, hey, check a box on what you've learned, but how well can you reason? Can you apply logic? Right, kind of these word problems, puzzles, and whatnot. And so the SAT was founded in the 1920s, and then the ACT in 1950s, 56 or 59. So those two companies have been around for a long time, and for the longest time they used to be very different from each other. The ACT has kind of always said, we assess what's being taught in the classroom. Well, then you can ask, well, what classroom? Because I'm pretty sure they're not talking about the Slater homeschool classroom, right? They're not talking about a Christian school classroom. What they're really talking about is whatever the lay of the land is in the public schools. So they're public school achievement tests, which today means they're Common Core aligned public school tests. Well, the SAT, actually, Mitch, I'm going to quiz you here. Do you know what SAT stands for? Do you remember?
Man, I do not.
So they don't say that anymore, but it was founded as the Scholastic Aptitude Test. And so, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier, aptitude, it's not just, can you check the box, what kind of skills have you acquired? But it's also about how well can you reason, how well can you think? I think I assume when you took the SAT, there were still analogies, there were some logic problems, some word problems, questions. Yep. So it was all about how well can you apply what you've learned as well. And so there were two different tests. You were always told, students were told, you're more of an SAT kid, you're more of an ACT kid. Now, none of them were aligned with kind of your Christian school curriculum or classical school curriculum, but at least students had some option. In the 2000s, when Common Core was introduced, College Board, which is the maker of the SAT, they lost some market share, and they lost some state contracts. And so, well, how do we get back to that? Well, they hired as their new CEO, who's still the CEO, David Coleman, who was the chief architect of the Common Core standard. So the guy who manufactured the whole thing about Common Core was hired by College Board to essentially rewrite the SAT and align it with Common Core. So that's where we are now, right? And that kind of prompted the founding of CLT, because now, the SAT is no longer an aptitude test. It's a Common Core aligned public school achievement test. Well, the ACT is already that. And so you have kind of the two, call them a duopoly, right? In the testing business, both really aligned with standards that, I don't want to say the majority, but a large portion of the country are not following. right? And so I think that prompted kind of, the founding of CLT and saying, hey, why is it that our Christian schools, our home schools, our Catholic schools, in a way, when it comes to testing, they have to compromise because it's not aligned at all with what they're actually learning in the classroom.
Hey, I just want to take a really quick break from the podcast to highlight one of our amazing partners and sponsors, ClassReach. If you're a new school administrator or founder and are struggling to keep up with all the hassles of planting a new school, like collecting tuition, communicating with parents, or handling student data, then you need ClassReach. ClassReach is the all-in-one software that helps with everything from admissions and tuition to classroom management and parent communications. Sign up for a free consultation with one of their school specialists and see how ClassReach can help your school grow today. You guys can check them out online, classreach.com. They are a kingdom-minded company, and I love their leadership team there. I've become friends with a lot of them. They truly are a great company. I support them, and I love them, and you guys will love them too. Check them out at classreach.com. Now, back to the show. And now, obviously, back then, let's say early 2000s, these Christian kids who were homeschooled their whole life or going to a Christian school their whole life now had to go take the SAT to then try and go into a Christian college or to a non-Christian college, and then their scores were not good, so they looked like they didn't know what they were doing. Is that kind of what was happening in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, because ultimately we're faced with a decision as educators, right? And if you're running your school, I was a school administrator. I was at a charter school, but I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate. Well, we want our schools to succeed, our students to succeed, and let's be honest, we want our school to look good. Of course we do. And so now we're looking at, and in my role, I was over the English department, and we looked at standardized testing. Well, I wanted our students to do well, but I also knew that if we're doing the PSAT or the SAT, we got to do test prep, because the content, right, is not really at all connected, or we would have to change our curriculum. And unfortunately, a lot of schools do. They change their curriculum to align with the standard that the College Board promotes. Because, and I think it is because we care about the kids, right? Because we want the students to do well. And oftentimes the families don't necessarily know the ins and outs of this. They just know, well, I took the SAT. I want my child to take the SAT, and I want her or him to do well. But it oftentimes forces us as school leaders to make compromises because we care about the kids, right? And I'm sure for you, you were homeschooled, you read great books, and you did math that was not Common Core line, all these beautiful things. And then you took this test and you're like, wait, but I got this really good education and I think I'm smart, but it's really just not translating. Like, why is it? And I think a lot of the strongest schools in the country that I have visited, some of the best Christian schools, Catholic schools, charter schools, I mean, just incredible. There's magic happening in the classroom. But when it comes to the testing, in a way, we have to defer. Right? We have to defer to the public schools. We have to defer to the progressive standards because we need to validate our success. And it's kind of bizarre when you think about that. And so, but we had to. We never had an option. What CLT is trying to do is say, wait, I mean, Christians founded the university, right? We set the standard for what education is. Why do we constantly defer, right? We should be able to set the standard. And so, CLT is kind of here to lock arms with Christian schools, with charter schools, with Catholic schools, and say, hey, our test better reflects, the great works that you're teaching, which you focus on your classroom, and in a way creating an alternative pipeline to still get kids into college, right? But do it with an assessment and with content that is not compromising their beliefs and convictions.
So are you guys telling schools and students for them to only take one and take a CLT, or is it still good for them to take all of them to get a really grand view of how they're doing in education?
I mean, like the idealist in me, of course, would say, well, only do CLT. I mean, we're still living in reality, right? And we also know that taking on the College Board is a monstrous task, right? And it happens, one student, one test at a time. So yes and no. I think we now have a lot of homeschool families that only take CLT because the colleges that they are considering are all CLT schools, and so there's no need to go into a public school to take the SAT, right? And there are now classical Christian schools and some Christian schools that they don't require the SAT, ACT anymore. right?
Mm.
But they say, hey, you can choose one of the three. And yes, if you're interested in going to Grove City College or maybe Hillsdale or Palm Beach or Baylor, like, oh, you know what? I'm going to start with the CLT, and maybe that's enough. You know, however, I also understand. I was at a charter school. We had to, by law, we had to give the PSAT and the SAT. We didn't even have a choice.
Mm.
And a lot of Christian schools, right? They might also idealistically say, oh, we only want to do CLT, but they also practically know that's a lot of parent education too, because when parents hear, you know, we're no longer offering the SAT, what they're potentially are thinking is, oh, are you depriving our students from potential success? And no one wants that. So I think it's kind of a slow, what a lot of the Christian schools have been doing, it's kind of a slow rollout. It's not a, you know, overnight we're just dropping College Board, even though some schools have done that. I think smaller schools have an easier way of doing that than the larger schools. But it's a small, right? Educating the parents, hey, here's kind of where the College Board has gone. A lot of schools have dropped AP classes because they're undermined the school's foundation and principles. And so there's already kind of I know your governor in Florida has kind of picked a little fight with the College Board, right? And said, wait, who has elected the College Board to be the authority on all of this? And I think parents resonate with that. And so a lot of schools on the high school side, they start with our 9th grade tests or our 10th grade tests, right? And maybe instead of doing the PSAT in 9th grade and in 10th grade and 11th grade, maybe they only do it 1 year in 10th and 11th grade. And then maybe the next year they only do it in 11th grade, right? And so we have a great team. We have a Christian school director and a really great team of partnership leaders that walk the schools through that and take everything into consideration. Say, okay, what are kind of some smaller steps that we can take alongside kind of the, you know, educating the parents and the staff that, you know, there are some changes. And I just recently talked to a director of a network of schools. And when I told her that, oh yeah, the SAT no longer has analogies, she's like, what? They dropped analogies when? I'm like 15 years ago. I mean, I think it was like 10, 15 years ago. It also reminded me that, you know, a lot of the times, like, our school leaders are busy. They don't have time to, like, every year retake the SAT to kind of know what's on the test now, you know? And so when I share some of that, they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, you know? So thanks to you, Mitchell, like we're kind of getting the word out, right? That some things have changed and maybe it's worth taking a closer look.
Yeah, and what I don't like about the system as a whole is it's not a one size fits all. You got so many different ways students learn, but also ways that they can show their knowledge too. And I hate putting all of them into one little box. And I feel like if I was in high school right now, I would probably be the one that takes all three. I'll just send in the one that I get the best score on, and then I'll submit that to the college.
Totally. I think you're absolutely right. I think the case that we're trying to make here over the next few years is, if you're a Christian school, well, start with CLT, right? And then go from there. Start with the assessment, like, especially if you're doing during the school day. The way my school, we always looked at it, right, is like, we don't want to introduce things on campus that actively undermine our mission, right? Or pull us away from our mission. And in reality, kind of College Board and ACT do. And so, you know, maybe we at least have like the default BCLT, at least during the school day, right? Where we can say, no, this is kind of a mission decision. And then, of course, we don't want to deprive students of the opportunity to get extra scholarships. Like, no, if you're a high performer and you have a chance to get national merit, as much as I dislike College Board, like, if my kid had a chance to get a full ride, I know what I would do, right? So I totally understand.
Yeah. Do you guys start with CLT? Is it 9th grade or 8th grade? You said that
3rd grade now. Yeah.
Okay. So I was kind of like leading to the next question of like, okay, so testing do you recommend, because I've maybe this, I know, okay, going all over the place here. So I remember as a little kid taking like little tests every year. And this is, again, a homeschool group that we were part of. And then we kind of see like, oh, how you doing? But it wasn't like it would hold you back a grade. It just kind of saw where you're at.
Right.
So I remember doing those growing up. But then, of course, then it got to the point of the actual SAT. So does the CLT kind of recommend the same thing? Like every year have like a standardized test, and it's the CLT test at 3rd grade that you take to kind of just see how you're doing in material as you get all the way through. Is that how it works?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. I wonder, did you do like the Iowa or the Stanford or Terra Nova? Do you remember any of those? Those are kind
I'd
of
have to phone my mom to even ask. I have no idea.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, you kind of asked earlier on, you're like, why should we even have testing? You know, and I think when folks and parents think of testing, And we kind of fed into that right now. I'm talking about high school. So much of the conversation about testing is kind of, it's a means to an end, right? We test in order to get something out of it. And it's oftentimes external, whether it's scholarships or getting kids into college. And I totally understand it's important, right? But really, assessment, every school does assessment, every teacher does assessment. Oftentimes it's informal assessment, just checking, hey, show your hand if if you have a question, or who got that problem right. I mean, we constantly do that. Why is that? Well, it gives us as educators a bit more information that can inform our instruction. And that's kind of the idea of our new CLT 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the elementary school, right? There's no scholarships, there's no high stakes. We're not going to give a projected SAT score, even though some companies do in 5th grade, and it drives me bonkers. I don't think we should. It's really, the assessment is to help the school. It's to help the teachers, right? Because, I thought I was a pretty good teacher, right? But sometimes there are things that an objective kind of assessment can give you some information that might help you make more informed decisions on your instruction. So, and kind of in the same vein as we talked about earlier, well, most of standardized testing companies are aligned with Common Core. They're pretty progressive. Well, if you're a Christian school, like, you don't really want to make any kind of instructional adjustments based on an assessment that not at all aligns with your curriculum, right? And so I think when folks look at, our website is cltexam.com, there's some sample tests, some kind of skills breakdown. They'll probably see, oh, wow, yeah, the kids, on the test, there's the Wind in the Willows and the Prince and the Pauper, and it's just a reading, writing, arithmetic, right? And so we're just looking at kind of the basics, but we do it with content that is honoring the student, that is beautiful. Again, that's not compromising the school's curriculum. And then every year, the school kind of sees, okay, we're kind of tracking growth, right? Maybe some students are, not quite on reading level. What can we do to get them on reading level? And we kind of partner with them to do that. In a way, the way I look at it, Mitchell, is you want to put testing in its rightful place. I think standardized testing has its importance has increased too much. It should not be that important. And it's for a testing company, it's a weird thing to say, right? But it is, like, our test, it should point back to the classroom, right? It shouldn't take up a lot of time. So we have really short tests, right? And the analytics should be easy to read. They should be helpful. And ultimately, like, our educators are the experts. Our parents are the experts. We're not telling you how to do your job. We're just providing some tools and some resources so that you can make the right kinds of decisions. And I think that makes us very, very unique in this space.
Hey, school success makers, Mitchell here. I just want to take a really quick break from the show to give a big, huge shout out to the 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟 Foundation. I absolutely love the 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟 Foundation. I've been friends and partners with them for a couple of years now, but we're bringing it to a whole new level. And I'm excited to share that our very own School Success podcast is now featured on the 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟 Foundation Podcast Network. The 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟 Foundation is a powerhouse of resources designed to support schools like yours, from free training events through the 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟 Foundation Institute to their incredible online news publication, The Lion, and of course, our new podcast, Home. They have everything you need to stay informed and inspired. And if you're dreaming of starting your own Christian school or co-op, don't miss their online course, Schoolbox. It's a fantastic resource to help you get started on the right foot. At School Success, we're proud to partner with the 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟 Foundation to bring you these valuable tools and insights. So visit 𝐒𝐻𝑒𝑟foundation.com to explore all they have to offer. Trust me, you won't want to miss out on these amazing opportunities for growth and success. And I love all the people over there, and I know you guys will too. So please go check them out, and you won't be disappointed. Now, back to the show.
You mentioned your test is shorter if compared to the SAT. I remember SAT took me like 5 hours or something to do. How long is your high school one for an average person to take?
Man, it used to be. So when we started in 2015-16, our first administration was to 46 students, I think, in 2016. And we were the first to market 2 hours online. We do paper testing as well, but we had an online test, and we were the only ones. Guess what the SAT is now? 2 hours and online. So they just changed it last year. But you know what? If what we do drives improvement, and we're okay with that, right? If College Board all of a sudden started putting like great books and and philosophy on their test, like, I could not be mad. I don't think they will. So our tests are only 2 hours long, which is great, right? Because ultimately, after a certain time, it just becomes an endurance test. It's not really a standardized test anymore. And I'm thinking in particular students with accommodations, right, that maybe have an IEP or a 504 and just need a little bit longer. Like I would have students in my office for, like you said, it's like 6-7 hours taking tests. That's just brutal.
Yeah.
On the especially the 3rd through 6th grade, there's like 4 sections and 2 are more reading, 2 are more math, and they're really short, like 25 minutes, and you can spread them out over a few days. You don't have to do it all in one day. And I mean, let's be honest, like 3rd grade kids, you're not going to sit them down for 2 hours. Like that's just not, how old are your kids, Mitchell? Are they in?
I got a 5-year-old. So
Yeah,
that's good.
5-year-old. So you're probably not going to sit still for 2 hours. And so we're trying to like be very flexible and really cater to the school's, schedule and make sure that, it doesn't interrupt too much with their workflow.
I know there's kids that are also just not test takers. They're really bad at like the pressure, all that. And I feel like I was one of those kind of kids, not extreme or anything. I just struggled with testing. What do you guys recommend, or what do you do with those students that they're really smart, but man, when you put them in front of a test, their brain kind of just turns off and they can't do that as well? Is there tips around that for them?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I've been noodling on that for a while. And, you wonder, why is some of that? And I had those students, and oftentimes they were actually my higher performers. It's like, why is that? And in a way, and maybe it's an imperfect analogy, but if you ask me right now, hey, go give a 30-minute talk on like whatever topic that you've never heard of, like I would be, and I'm a good speaker, I would be anxious. I would be completely like unprepared, right? And would be nervous. Well, if you're asking a homeschool student or a Christian school student now to take a test with content that is just so alien to them, like, wait, now we're reading these newspaper clippings or like these random passages about Greek yogurt, when I'm used to like reading, like maybe the church fathers or Benjamin Franklin or Charles Dickens, right? Like it is like you go in and like, oh my gosh, like, and I have to remember all the test tagging strategies that I've studied, instead of, hey, your first passage maybe is a C.S. Lewis. Like, oh, wow, I know C.S. Lewis. It might not be something that you've read before, but it's like, okay. And our test is not so much about test taking strategies and gaming the test. Is like, show us what you know. And I think that kind of approach, it alleviates anxiety. And so we do have sample tests. We have practice materials. I think there's certainly having familiarity with the format. Like when you were homeschooled, like your mom didn't assess you with standardized tests, multiple choice, right? And most Christian schools don't do multiple choice, maybe a little bit in high school, but that's not a way. And so, yes, you want to kind of take a practice test just to kind of be familiar with the format and the timing, right? But beyond that, that's the nice thing about CLT, that really not a whole lot of test prep is necessary, which I think does alleviate some of that anxiety.
Good. So those that are listening right now that maybe they've not heard of CLT, or they have, but they just, this is like new to them and they're learning. What would you recommend them do? Obviously go to your website you mentioned, but can they bring in maybe some sample tests along with the SAT to their school if they wanted to try and maybe have both options for their students? If we have homeschool families listening, or if we have the private schools, what do you kind of recommend that process to kind of adopt it?
Yeah, well, we're so excited. I feel like every day someone new is going to hear about CLT. I don't know if you know the Heritage Foundation, but Kevin Roberts just called CLT the most disruptive and hopeful movement in education of America, which is really, really beautiful thing to say for him. And we didn't pay him to say it. He came up with that. But I think it is like we're disrupting some things right now. Just like I think the Christian school movement, the classical movement, we're disrupting in a way the status quo. Right. And we're creating alternative pipelines, almost like an ecosystem where we're not so dependent on the government for certain things. Right. So I would go on cltexam.com, cltexam.com. If you just type in CLT, you're probably going to get to the Charlotte airport. So try cltexam.com. There's kind of two different paths. There's one for schools and then one for homeschool, because it's a little bit different, right? If you're just looking at an exam for one student or for your whole school. But yes, there's some sample tests. And then we have, I am just so impressed by the team that we have assembled at CLT. You've met some of them, Adam, right? Our Christian school director. I wouldn't get a job at CLT anymore. I'm so glad that I joined kind of early days of CLT. We have former heads of school, academic deans that are not necessarily at CLT because they just love testing. They love serving schools. They love helping, right? You help schools on the marketing side, right? We help them with the assessment. There's curriculum providers. We each have our hedgehog to serve them. So look at some of the sample materials, and then I would say schedule a meeting with us. There's a few buttons where you can schedule a demo or a meeting. Whether it's you're thinking about bringing this to your third grade, or maybe you have a junior daughter who's looking at maybe a school that we have on our list. I think we love the meetings. We love getting together and having a conversation on how we can best serve you all. So cltexam.com is the best starting point there.
Perfect. Well, I know you guys obviously gotten your word out there really well, because my neighbor next door, they're our best friends, and she's been doing classical conversations with her children as they homeschool. And I remember she knows obviously I'm in the school space, and so she asked me, this is months ago, and she's like, "Hey, have you ever heard of CLT?" And I was like, "Yeah, what about it though?" And she's like, "Well, I was looking at the school. They're at a homeschool co-op, and she's like, they're starting to do, they're saying we should take the CLT, and I don't know what it is. I don't know about it." And she was like, because she is so familiar with all the other testing things. I go, "Oh," I said, "you are going to be in good hands." I said, "I know a lot of people there, and they're awesome." And so that was actually, you and I had kind of just talked about the potential of having a podcast. And so I told her, "Hey, I'm actually going to be having one of them on the podcast, so you have to listen to this episode." So I'm going to send this episode to her. But she had already heard about it, was interested in kind of diving in, and then me backing it up with, "I know them there, they're great people." And so I know she's going to be doing the CLT with, and she has a third grader. And so that's why she's like, I remember her referencing the fact that they had young tests to get started. And so you guys are doing a lot of really good things right. And I know that because you guys are growing and it's spreading, but it's cool.
We're just doing our part. I mean, I think, why I'm so hopeful, and I can, as the immigrant, right? Why I'm so hopeful about the future of America is because of what's happening in education right now. And we always think, the times that we live in are the most special and the most disruptive and the most whatnot. But I really do think, since COVID, whether it's on the classical Christian side, whether there's a Christian organization called CISA, they're doing just incredible work. The Herzog Foundation, right? I mean, there's so many organizations now that are supporting the work that schools are doing, raising awareness, curriculum providers. It's just, and ultimately, I think it's just we're letting parents back into the driver's seat, right? Yeah. And when parents do that, good things will happen. And we're just so honored to play a little part. It's not the most, I know it's not the most exciting, right? Testing, really, but we know it's important, and especially, we haven't touched on that, maybe just briefly. With a lot of the new school choice legislation, education savings accounts, right? A lot of these have testing as accountability measures written into law, right? And so you're in Florida, right? They have a really great ESA program. Well, if you're accepting any of these ESA dollars, whether you're a homeschooler, whether you're a Christian school, you have to do testing. So then the question becomes, well, what test are we doing? And I would say I would highly recommend looking at CLT, because we're now on those lists, right? And so if you have to do testing anyways, you might as well go with CLT.
Man, so that is really cool. I did not know that, and I'm glad I'm sure every state has their own little weird thing of tracking it, but I'm glad they're doing that so people don't take advantage of the system, because at any point people always ruin it for the other people who are doing it.
That's why we can't have nice things.
Exactly. So I'm glad that they're doing that, and obviously I'd highly recommend everybody checking out CLT to make sure you don't lose your funds and lose out on that. So with that, okay, so if somebody has to take the test, do they have to score a specific score to then get the funds, or just take the test? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, it depends on the state. So it's different state to state. It's usually based on percentiles, and so you have to show proficiency to a certain extent, and then it depends on the state what their cutoff is. So I don't have it memorized for all of the different states, but it's usually a certain percentile that you have to reach, and you can do that through Iowa testing or Terra Nova, and now CLT is an option there. It is more than just the testing. You also have to show that you can have some basic reading and grammar skills that you can demonstrate. But yeah.
Can you, so I know for Florida, not to beat a dead horse with this. So with Florida, you can start getting funds at kindergarten, first grade. But if your testing only starts at third grade, how are you supposed to show proof of that? And let's just talk Florida specifically. If there's no testing for that grade, do you have to find another one then if CLT can't be that one?
So most, and I'd have to double check with Florida, most ESA bills don't require testing below third grade.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason we decided to start in third grade. And I think, think about having a kindergartner and, putting them in front of a, computer. We do paper tests too, but, and just trying to, oftentimes it's also not really valid. So most of the accountability bills don't come into place until third grade.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, I have learned a ton from this episode, and it's made me wish that there was CLT back when I was taking school. So I feel like I would have scored better. So
I'm sure you would.
Maybe I should just take a CLT test just to see how it'd be bad. No, I shouldn't do that.
So I was an English major, and the math is humbling. I haven't done math in a while. So I was pretty solid on the verbal reasoning and the grammar. The math, I don't want to talk about it.
Man, see, so I remember math was my strongest part in school, and I did really, really well. But I remember when I did the SAT, I remember specifically the sine, cosine, and tangent stuff that they brought out, and the mean, median, and mode and range, and all these things that, like, for stuff I go, oh my goodness, I remember this, but it was 4 years ago that I did this in middle school. I did that stuff in middle school, and I know I did not get those right because it's gone. Once you don't use, if you don't use it, you lose it. So
it also shows you homeschool. I mean, you're usually so far above, what the public schools are doing. Almost like at that point, then it becomes a disadvantage. You knew too much.
Well, our neighbor, we were just over at their house the other day, who's doing the classical conversations. She started saying all these history things verbatim from like the songs that she's been learning with the classical stuff, and it was just mind-boggling. She read off all the prepositions from the song and I'm like, and she's third grade. I'm like, holy smokes, this kid's a genius over here. So it's I definitely love the homeschooling side, but I love what you guys are doing. I love that you guys are making that readily available. So as we kind of close out the episode, I always end with the same question. And it's, if you obviously have some school leaders listening here, if you were to share a piece of advice with the school leaders listening, what would that piece of advice be?
Be bold. I think really now is the time to be bold. I think we see it especially in higher ed. A lot of liberal arts Christian schools have kind of compromised on their identity, on their original mission, on their vision, and they're not doing too well, right? Because families are looking for strong leadership. They're looking for places where they don't have to compromise on their beliefs. And so, especially if you're running a Christian school, you have a beautiful mission, and you don't even have to come up with it. It's given to you by the Lord, right? Unapologetically lead with that. And really think about everything that you're doing. And I think majority of schools do, right? The hiring, the pedagogy, the curriculum, and the assessment, and be really bold and like leading that with mission first. I think what we're seeing kind of enrollment trends, K-12 as well. Families are looking for that. And they're not looking for, a public school with a religious sprinkle. And maybe that was the case 20 years ago. It's no longer the case. And so now is the time to boldly proclaim the gospel at your school, and families will come, they will flock to you.
I love it. Well, Soren, thank you for taking time out of your day to hop on, teach me about testing, teach our listeners about testing. And obviously those that are listening, check out cltexam.com to check out CLT and everything they have to offer in the testing world. And Soren, man, hey, have a good rest of your year as we record this. It's still technically 2024. So happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas to you and your family. And likewise. Thank you again for hopping on today.
Appreciate you, brother. God bless.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Soren for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what him and his team are doing over at CLT, and I'm wishing them nothing but the best as they continue to grow and help all of you with another option for testing. So make sure you check out their website, cltexam.com. And as always, I'm hoping you guys were able to learn at least one thing from today's episode that you can take back to your schools to make them better than it is right now. And I'm hoping that it is in the world of testing. So before you guys go today, we always have the recommendation of 3 free things that we offer to you guys. We want to make sure you're reminded of those. The first one is, of course, the podcast that you're listening to. Episodes drop every single Monday, so make sure you're tuning back in for those new episodes that are coming out. And the second one is our School Success Report, which you can find that on our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com. In the top right-hand corner, there is a button currently there that you can sign up for the School Success Report. There is teacher articles. There's articles about schools and education and things that the team has written. We've also found some online that we put inside that report. So you have a nice thing to get every Monday to kind of get you ready for the week. So make sure you're tuning in and getting that as well, because that goes out on Mondays. It goes out on Mondays as well. So the last free thing that we have is our Facebook group called School Success Makers. If you are not yet in there, we want to make sure you are completely free, of course. And I'm personally in there. Would love to see you in there as well. So go join the School Success Makers Facebook group, and I will see you in there. Great place to meet other teachers and educators across the country, ask questions, and get some community around you, because we all need some community in our lives. Can I get an amen? All right, amen. Sweet. So, guys, as always, we will be back here next week with another awesome guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Herzog Foundation.